I cannot think of any better fate than being a Palestinian. I went back to America and I told my Mom, let's go apply for the Israeli passport for me. I didn't want it, but now I needed it. So I went to the consulate with my mother in Philadelphia. We filled out some paperwork. I came back 2 weeks later and had a passport. This is when I realized the Israelis really don't know what they're doing. You could have said no to me. I'm the guy you should say no to. So now technically they have to let me in, right? I'm going home. Israel has a policy called administrative detention, where they can hold somebody who they have jurisdiction over, which is me now. Yeah. 6 months without any charges. I'm a little scared of that. Not because I'm scared of being held in jail by the Israelis, but I figure if I get arrested by the Israelis, it'll make it onto social media and everybody will start talking about it. And they'll say, hey, Amer got arrested. And I'll be like, yeah. And they'll be like, let's all free Amer. Kulluna Amer. But then I'm worried that somebody's going to be like, and Amer is going to go on hunger strike. I mean, look, I love Palestine. But, if they put like a big plate of bamia in front of me, I'm going to tell them where you live.
Amer, thank you so much for being here today. It's amazing to see you in person, and the smile is as disarming and warm in person as it is on the screen. Maybe we can start off with, how does a lawyer end up being a comedian, particularly when they come from a Palestinian family?
Well, since I come from a Palestinian family, I was going to be a doctor.
Yeah.
And then... And then when I was in college, I took chemistry classes and realized I wasn't very good at it.
And your dad is a chemist?
My dad's a PhD in chemistry. So
with patents? And,
it's 41 patents. UNRWA refugee with 41 patents.
Inshallah.
And then, ironically, UNRWA, a refugee, just won a Nobel Peace Prize in chemistry the other day, Amer Zahr.
Amazing.
So we excel everywhere. But I was going to be a doctor. And then I realized I didn't like the sciences as much as I learned I didn't like the sciences when I started getting bad grades in my science classes. And then I switched to history as a major, and I really loved it. And when I graduated, I said, let's go to law school. So I applied to law school.
And if I made the context of history back then, were you doing Middle Eastern history because you seem so literate, or were you, was it sort of global?
It was American history and Arab history.
Okay.
There's nothing called the Middle East. The Middle East is a colonial term. We learned that from Edward Said.
Nah.
It means east of white people. We're in the Arab world. Plus, the Middle East includes some people who we might not want to be included with. So
they didn't call it Arab history where you were, right?
No, they didn't. They called it. Well, we had two departments. Something called Middle East and North African Studies, and then we had something else called Arabic, Armenian, Persian, Turkish, and Islamic Studies. Okay. So another way to say Middle East. Another way to throw everybody together. Yeah. So I got my degree in history, and I concentrate a lot in American history too, and that was really fascinating to me, especially legal history. So I went to law school. I ended up getting a master's degree in Middle East and North African Studies and a law degree. And while I was in law school, I tried comedy. There was a comedian coming to campus, and this Arab student group put out this email, says, hey, does anybody want to try, open mic stuff, basically.
And you'd never done it before?
No, I had always told stories about my parents to people, but never on a stage. Yeah. So I got on a stage, and I really didn't know what I was doing. My head was down. I was walking around. But I told a couple jokes about my dad, and everybody laughed. I said, oh, this is,
this works.
This is pretty cool. So when I graduated from law school, I said, let me try this comedy thing. And if I fail, I'll go be a lawyer. Well, I lived in an Arab, very Arab-heavy community.
Michigan.
Yeah, has the biggest concentration of Arab Americans. And so there's always events. So I would call them, and I live between Cleveland and Chicago, where there's also a lot of Arabs. So I would basically find out whenever any Arab organization was having an event, and I would call them and I'd say, hey, you want a comedian? And so I did it for free, a few shows. Then somebody paid me $50, and somebody paid me $100. The first time I got paid $500, I was like, man, it is amazing.
You weren't practicing law at all?
No, so I didn't even take the bar exam or anything like that.
Wow.
And so luckily it caught on, the comedy thing, and it became a career and a full-time job. All the way, I started traveling around the world. I mean, it was very great. And then I didn't get my law license until COVID, because then COVID happened and like every show got canceled. The first things to go were live performances, and they were the last things to come back. So I thought it was going to be like 2 or 3 months, ended up being 6 months. Then I thought, man, we might never be on a stage again. So then I finally took the bar exam, which is the licensing exam for attorneys in America. And I got my law license in 2021. And then right when I got my law license, shows started coming back.
The world's open.
Yeah, so I didn't really now I'll consult on cases every now and then. And I've been teaching law for a long time too as an adjunct professor, but I don't take clients on because I travel, it wouldn't be ethical to take on a client when I travel a lot. But to answer your question about law and comedy, look, the practice of law is the practice of advocacy. And to me, comedy is inherently political. And so it's some sort of form of advocacy in and of itself, especially if you're a Palestinian Arab comedian. Also, in law school, we are taught and we teach people, maybe they do this in the tech world too, is learn everything you can about a situation, all the facts, and then focus in on what's really important. But you can't focus in on what's really important unless you learn everything first, and then talk about what's really important. So when you're arguing about it, you have to be like knowledgeable but brief, okay? Same thing with comedy. You're like trying to boil down complexities into something sort of digestible for people. You can't lecture on stage. And so they're sort of similar skill sets.
So you've sort of answered one part of the question, which is comedy and law. And I love the fact that you were able to tie them both to advocacy. But maybe we'll also talk about the other part of the question, which is comedy and Palestinian parents. So as your dad, an Urwa refugee, patents, chemistry is sort of a lot more of a traditional career choice. And when his son, who's just finished law at university, comes up to him and says, "Dad, I'm giving up the law and I'm not going to practice and I'm going to go up on a stage and make people laugh." Yeah. What was the reaction at home?
So my parents are hippies. They met in Berkeley, California, which you're familiar with, in the 70s. So I mean, total hippies. My dad had just come from Jordan. My mom came to America when she was a teenager, and they met there. So they've always been a little bit more open-minded, let's say, but of course they were freaked out. Michigan, I went to the University of Michigan Law School, which is a pretty good law school, okay? Yeah. Top 10 law school. So you're supposed to get a job right away. You make, back then, a couple $100,000, right? Whatever. But I kind of convinced them that, hey, I'm just kind of like, going to try this and let's see what happens. And, it turned out, luckily, it became successful quickly, within a year or so. I was able to pay my rent and all this kind of stuff. Now, it's been 20 years of doing comedy full time, and my parents will come to a lot of my shows, and they're inspiration for a lot of what I do. And if they come to a show, after the show, they'll walk around, and my dad will say, when he was talking about his father on stage.
That's me.
That's me. That's me. And my mom will say, he's very funny, but, he's a lawyer. She still describes
She's still holding on to the
still describes me as a lawyer to everybody. Yeah.
You started at a time when I don't know if there were any other Palestinian comedians around. So when you think about role models or inspirations, would you have to find them outside of the community or even support? Or were you able to get some of that within the Arab or Palestinian community in the U.S.?
Yeah, when I started doing it, so Axis of Evil was just a thing, just being a new thing. I was really encouraged and supported by Ahmed, who's one of the founders of the Axis of Evil.
Is he still performing?
Yes.
He is.
Great Arab-American comedian and one of the pioneers of Arab-American comedy that made it like, you could see him doing it. And so you saw someone who came from your culture doing this thing. And no comedians were talking about Palestine. So I kind of made that my thing in the beginning. And then it's sort of become my brand over the years, which I'm very proud of. So there were those inspirations, but bigger comedic inspirations were especially black comedians like Dave Chappelle, Richard Pryor, Chris Rock.
Who has evolved, Chappelle in particular, has evolved more and more into sort of political and social commentary over the years, I feel, from the early days. And it's great. I mean, it's great to see him.
Well, I think he's always been political. So he's always been political in the sense of, it depends what you mean when you say political, but he's always talked about race.
Okay.
And from the beginning. And race is political, right? And and to me, that was sort of telling your story of your people. Richard Pryor did that. Those are George Carlin. I loved him because he was very biting politically and socially. To me, comedy, and this is something I learned from Ahmed too. He said this to me. Comedy is a form of protest. Okay, comedy in its purest form is a form of protest, and you're protesting against something. Power, the government, ridiculousness of society, whatever. So comedy is a form of protest. And we even saw this back in the days when there was like the court jester, you know. He might make fun of the king, but they didn't kill him because he was funny. Yeah. So comedy has always been a form of
fool who was wiser than anyone else, including the king.
Right. And so comedy has always been that, a way of being able to talk about something, but if you can make people laugh and do it in a creative way, it's much more digestible. And so that's how I viewed it from the very beginning. In the beginning, I was more vanilla. I would tell jokes about accents and parents. But very quickly, I got into Palestine because I was raised like that by my parents. My parents were activists. I was always marching. I was always, I always tell people we Palestinians are raised to be professional protesters from a young age. We're just marching and chanting and all these kinds of things. And we still see it today. I mean, there's 7-year-old kids walking around Dubai and other places that, they know Palestinian chants maybe better than anyone else. So that kind of upbringing, and being Palestinian, of course, is inherently political. And it's relentless, it's always following you no matter what.
Just even saying you're Palestinian rubs people the wrong way. I mean, it's like just the very act of talking to people about where you're from can cause people to. There's always a reaction. So I always find it's either a big hug and a welcome, and I feel so bad, or it's almost like an act of rebellion just saying where you're from.
Well, the big hug stuff is definitely more recent.
Yeah,
but the reactions before were either combative, but most of the time they were like
dismissive. Sometimes.
My dad used to tell this story where he would say to somebody, I'm Palestinian, and the reaction would say, oh, I don't want to talk about politics.
Yeah.
Like immediately, okay? Always viewing us as this
too complex, let's dismiss it, let's not even...
like contentious thing, right? And of course, we come from a long culture as well of thousands of years. So it's always been something. And now it's, something else. Yeah. But it's always been something.
What amazes me is that I guess the Palestinian story is filled with a lot of themes, Taban. There's a lot of heroism, there's a lot of sumud, there's a lot of survival, there's a lot of sadness, Taban, particularly with this ongoing genocide, is the amount of insane tragedy that you see every day. I find it's such a difficult thing to make it a laughable topic, and yet you're able to do that so well. And maybe tell me a bit about how you do that. So how do you skirt all the tragedy associated with it and make it something that people are willing to sort of sit on the stage and listen to you for hours on end and laugh? And what is that process like?
Well, in my book, I say that being Palestinian
I'm super excited to read it.
Being Palestinian makes me smile.
Yeah,
in the introduction of the book, I say we've all seen somebody laugh so much they start crying.
Yeah,
we've all seen that. But you might also see somebody cry so much they start laughing. So these emotions are connected somehow, and they've always been connected. So comedy. The best comedy can come from tragedy, and comedy comes from storytelling. And we Palestinians have a lot of that, storytelling and tragedy. And so it's sort of like a natural environment for them. I've always said the hardest job is like white male comedian. Because what is there to talk about? Your life is not complicated. Nothing really dramatic happens to you. Nothing bad happens to you. And so if you watch white comedians, a lot of them are doing really boring observational comedy, like Jerry Seinfeld. Have you ever noticed when it's rarely about themselves. It's rarely about the experience of their people. Whereas non-white comedians, Black, Mexican, Arab, whatever, Jewish, talk about their people and talk about their families and talk about how the immigrant experience or the political experience or discrimination. And that is always much more, it connects much more with people. People want to, a comedy show, I always say a comedy show is like a long conversation. I'm talking, they're laughing, but it's a conversation. And I have to enter the comedy show being as if I've known these people for 30 years. In other words, I'm sharing myself right away. There's no time for like getting comfortable with them, The best comedians are honest and transparent and vulnerable. And so when it comes to like talking about who we are and as a people, that comes very easy. And of course, Palestine is full of all kinds of emotions, right? But to me, there was never this. Sometimes people say to me, comedy is about the truth and talking about the truth. And people say to me sometimes, I never know when you're joking. And I say, I'm never joking.
Yeah.
I use comedy to tell the truth. And that's, to me, why it's been an effective. And we've had a lot of weapons to tell our truth. Poetry, songs, comedy is just another one of them. And I've been lucky enough to be associated with Palestine when I tell my comedy. And I don't see it as a struggle, this is really sad, so how do you make people laugh? When I do a comedy show in Palestine, I've done more comedy shows in Palestine than everybody. I've probably done 200 comedy shows in Palestine. And people come to the shows, and when they laugh, it's like therapeutic, right? Everyone shared the same experiences. That, to me, shows that, this can bring people together in a way that's really effective. I'm not saying it's better than other ways. I don't know, but it's really effective.
I've personally experienced that in your shows, where just the act of being in a room of other people who can laugh about these Palestinian stories, you come out feeling like a huge load has been taken off you. But you just said two statements that are really interesting, and if I may dig into them a bit further. One was you said it's about fundamentally telling the truth, and the other was it comes easy. And to me, telling the truth is one of the hardest things that a human being can do, particularly when it comes to being Palestinian or talking about the Palestinian experience, given how much blowback that story has had, almost institutionalized blowback. It's built into systems. So I'm sure in you telling the truth about Palestine, whether through comedy or otherwise, you've had a price to pay that maybe other comedians have not had to pay. Has there been a price to pay, and what has that been? And in America, I imagine that could be everything from being stopped at airports, possibly, to being observed a bit more closely by the authorities. But that might not be the experience. I'd love to hear about your personal experience.
Well, definitely I've been through the experience of, pro-Israel groups calling up theaters to get my show canceled.
And have the shows been canceled on occasion?
So early, yes. But later on, no.
Okay.
But I've done shows at Carnegie Hall in New York City. They tried to cancel that show. They weren't successful. Kennedy Center in D.C. They tried to cancel that show. They weren't successful. There's a website called Canary Mission. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
And you're named?
Oh, I have one of the longest profiles on Canary Mission. And I'm very proud of it. In fact, a lot of times when I go to perform somewhere, I'm going to speak somewhere, and they ask me for my bio, I send them my Canary Mission link. It is the most effective biography anyone's ever done on me. And it's all true. Yeah. I mean, that's why people say, can you sue Canary Mission? I tell them as a lawyer, look, all they're doing is pulling up the stuff you said And it's true. And by the way, they bring up stuff I said that I don't even remember that I said. And it's really funny. I'm like, wow, that was a good tweet. I totally forgot about that tweet. I got to turn that into a joke. So...
But a lot of people, when they get listed in Canary Mission, that's career ending, right? Or
well, they think it is.
They think.
I mean, that's the whole point of Canary Mission.
Yeah.
Canary Mission is a fear tactic. It's not something that actually gets researched by people.
Okay.
And by the way, if you're talented, and most Palestinians are, none of that stuff really matters. And that's been my experience. Now, they try to silence us, of course. And there's only one reason you try to silence the other side. That's because you're lying. If you notice, we Palestinians, we never really try to silence them. We kind of like it when they talk because they eventually confess. If you let a racist talk long enough, they confess. And sometimes you see them like remembering the talking points. Palestinians, we don't really have talking points. Yeah. We have our grandmothers who we learned from. My grandmother used to lay on her bed every day in our house, and she would hold up two fingers and she would say in Arabic, "Alulna btirja'u ba'd usbu'ain." They told us we could come back in 2 weeks. And she said that every day. So that was obviously trauma, right, for her.
Actually, my grandparents' home in Palestine still stands, and my grandma's pots are still hanging.
Yeah.
And occasionally the family, when they visit, they knock on the door, and then you have the current occupier opening it and walking us through our own house with the furniture still in there. And it's a crazy situation to be in.
Yes. I mean, look, being Palestinian is really, kind of living in an alternate reality. It's full of ridiculousness. And there's a lot of humor in that. And so when it comes to talking about that in America, look, there's ways that you can make it easier for yourself in America and Hollywood. I've been asked to go perform with pro-Israel comedians on tours. I've said no. Unfortunately, a lot of Arab and Muslim and Palestinian comedians have said yes. There have been comedians who go perform for the American troops. And if you're willing to do these things, then more doors will open up for you. And to me, whenever somebody asks me, like,
maybe you lose your story too, right? So the doors,
of course,
you're no longer.
There's cost, right?
Yeah.
So and then you end up having some sort of corporate master. When really being a comedian should be like a totally independent thing. That's the whole point of comedy, is that you're kind of an independent contractor and you can say whatever you want. And you have your own following. And you don't have to appeal to everybody, right? You appeal to the people who agree with you or people who want to hear your story. Once you become corporate in it, it becomes a different enterprise altogether. And so, but if you do certain things, certain doors will open for you. But when people have asked me, how do I make my decisions? I always say, I want my people in Palestine to name something after me when I die. And they don't do that because he had 1 million views or because he had a Netflix special or because whatever. They do it because you stood for something.
Yeah.
And that's what drives me. And so when I go to Palestine and people stop me and say, hey, thanks for doing what you do, or, I really love what you do, that's all that really matters to me. I ended a show last time with saying, about a story about how the guy who sells kak el Uts in Ramallah likes me. And, Hollywood might not like me, and New York Times will like me, CNN does, but that guy likes me. And that's all that really matters to me. That's all that matters.
Yeah. You talked about the reception you've had in Palestine from Palestinians. And I'm sure, obviously, given how much you've spoken the truth in every stage that you've had, that would be the reception. Tell me a bit about the Israeli reception when you visited Palestine. I mean, they must be aware of what you do and who you are. And given that you're on Canary Mission, they if that's what's public, they probably know a lot more that's also private. Have they been just willing to open the doors and let you in anyway? Or what does the reception of Amer Zahr look like on the borders when you do arrive?
So like I said, a lot of people don't read Canary Mission.
Yeah.
They do.
They do.
Yeah. But they also don't need it.
Yeah.
So I started going to Palestine and doing shows in like 2007 or 8 in the beginning. And then I just got hooked to doing shows in Palestine. And then I started a comedy festival in Palestine in 2015. And we do it every year.
In Ramallah?
It's in Ramallah, Nablus, Bethlehem, and Jerusalem.
Oh, amazing.
I take 7 or 8 comedians there and we perform for a week.
And are they all Palestinian themes or the comedians?
No, the comedians are mixed backgrounds. Most of them are Arab American, but they're mixed backgrounds. And but I've taken white comedians, black comedians, South African comedians, like they're all kinds. But I would go, and so my mom was born in Akka in the 50s. So she was born as a citizen of the state of Israel. And she could always give her kids the passport. I didn't want it for a long time. So I used to go in and out of Palestine as an American. And they would hold me for a long time, but they would always eventually let me in.
And hold you with an interrogation or just hold you?
No, it's like 95% holding, 5% interrogation.
Yeah.
And they come back and they say stuff and then they leave and they come. The whole point of this exercise is so that you either say during it, you say, you know what, screw this, I just want to leave. Or they might let you in, but you say, I don't want to do that again. So you don't go back. That's the whole point of that exercise. It has nothing to do with security. Okay. And so, but I would always go through it, and sometimes it was an hour, sometimes it was 10 hours, whatever. But I'd get in. In 2014, I was rejected entry twice. Okay, in the same summer, from Jordan.
And this is, you went to the Allenby Bridge and they said, head back.
Once was from the Allenby Bridge, once was from the northern bridge that goes to Bisan and Nazareth.
Yeah.
So, they don't give you a reason. They say, hey, your security clearance hasn't come back yet. We're getting ready to close, whatever. So I was worried about getting banned, which I didn't want to get banned. So after that happened, I went back to my mother and I said, I went back to America and I told my Mom, let's go apply for the Israeli passport for me. And
it's such an interesting concept anyway for a Palestinian, right?
Yeah, I don't really have a problem. I never had a problem with it. First of all, a lot of, my mom's whole side of the family has Israeli. 2 million Palestinians have Israeli passports. And to me, it's just like, these are the guys that happen to be giving out passports now.
And it facilitates me going home more.
120 years ago was the Ottomans, 100 years ago was the British, and now it's these guys. Yeah. And someday it'll be somebody different too. Whatever. Mahmoud Darwish had an Israeli passport once. Some of the greatest Palestinian artists have had Israeli. Whatever. These just happen to be the guys in charge right now. But as long as I didn't need it, I didn't want it. But now I needed it. So I went to the consulate with my mother in Philadelphia. We filled out some paperwork, paid them whatever the price was to get the passport. I came back 2 weeks later and had a passport. And this is when I realized that Israelis really don't know what they're doing. I'm not. You could have said no to me. I'm the guy you should say no to.
And so you've been able to go. With
now I go in. Now, it's a different sort of apprehension now when I enter, because so now technically they have to let me in, right? I'm going home. They never say welcome home, by the way.
Yeah.
But now. It's, as you might know, Israel has a policy called administrative detention, where they can hold somebody who they have jurisdiction over, which is me now.
Yeah, without disclosing the reason and without any rights.
6 months without any charges. And then they can renew that for another 6 months. And they've done that with it. There's thousands of Palestinians who are being held under administrative detention, which means no charge. It's like the most un-American thing ever. No charges. You're just sitting there in jail, waiting. So they could do that to me now. And I'm a little scared of that. Not because I'm scared of being held in jail by the Israelis. I'm not scared of that. But I figure if I get arrested by the Israelis, it'll make it onto social media. And everybody will start talking about it. And they'll say, hey, Amer got arrested. And I'll be like, yeah. And they'll be like, let's all free Amer. Kulluna Amer. And yeah. But then I'm worried that somebody's going to be like, and Amer is going to go on hunger strike.
You don't want to go there.
I mean, look, I love Palestine. But, everyone has their limits. Yeah. I could last maybe 12, 16 hours. But, if they put a big plate of bamia in front of me,
you're going to eat the bamia.
I'm going to tell them where you live. I'm going to tell them where Hanan Ashrawi lives. I will drop all the news. Right. I'm not sure I'm that strong. I don't know if I can do it. But look, at the end of the day, Israel is a weak country, a weak force. And all these things are scare tactics. And that's how you have to look at it. Because if you look at it any other way, then they win. You know, when I talk to so many Palestinians who might have the ability to go to Palestine. Have you been to Palestine?
I have, and for a whole bunch of reasons. The last time I went, I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
I talk to so many Palestinians who have the ability to go. You know, let's say they grew up in refuge, but now they have the ability. They got a certain passport or whatever. And they say, I don't want to go. And I say, why? Say, I don't want to deal with them. But this is exactly what they want, right?
And in fact, one of the first questions you get asked by them when they ask you where you're from and you say, I'm Palestinian, is when was the last time you were there?
Right.
And it's almost to prove the point that,
right.
You know,
it's like it's
like
really
you don't
dystopian.
have connection because you're not there. But
but
the
why
reason
am I
you're not there
right.
is because you're not letting me in.
You're the person. You're the reason I'm not there.
Yeah.
You know, and they usually. But by the way, and I've heard that before. You know, when was the last time you? But sometimes we Palestinians think that when they're asking us these questions, that they're messing with us. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, they're not. They are. These are like pretty lowly educated on Palestinians, and they're just like trained. They're just asking questions they were trained to ask.
Yeah.
They don't know that they're triggering you when they ask that question. I was one time on the border, and they said, so your dad, where was your dad born? And I said, Jaffa. And they said, so you're going to visit your dad in Jaffa? I said, no, he doesn't live in Jaffa anymore. You know, they said, when was he born? I said 1948. And they said, when did he leave Jaffa? I said 1948. My dad was 1 month old when he was ethnically cleansed. And they said, so where's your dad live? I said, he lives in Pennsylvania. And they said, so he moved from Jaffa to Pennsylvania? I said, no, there was a lot of steps in between, you know. This is a Palestinian. You want to go through the whole story? We can go through the whole story. And then this like 22-year-old person looked at me and said, so why did your father leave Jaffa in 1948? Okay. And you know how you can, if you've been around people long enough, you can tell whether someone's being sarcastic with you or whether they're actually stupid. And it was very clear to me that this person was actually stupid. Okay. They were just asking the questions that they were trained to ask, and they really didn't know the answer.
No idea.
Okay. And by the way, this is part of what Israel does, right? They don't educate their public on what they did to us.
Yeah.
I mean, we educate their public on what they did to us.
The Nakba is denied.
Right. So at the end of the day, we often give them too much credit. You know, for instance, when you go there and they say to you, "What is your father's name? What is your father's name?" Now, I've learned, and Palestinians are always like not offended by this question. They're like, oh my God, they knew it before I said it to them. They knew my father's name and my father's name and my uncle's name.
It's all written in the passport typically. Most of us write like four generations.
This is not secret information. Like to an Arab, this is not secret information. When I introduce myself, I say, my name is Amer Zahr. Yeah. It's not secret. So the fact that they know it is not that amazing, okay? The fact that they were able to register in a computer, big deal.
In today's world, the fact that we know our fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers is becoming an anomaly, right? So many people in the world don't know who their own father is.
But I've come to the conclusion that the reason they ask us this question is because they actually think they misunderstand our culture so much. As much as they try to steal it, they kind of misunderstand it. And they misunderstand our culture so much that they think this is an important interrogation because they don't know who their grandfather is. It's projection. And we have to stop like falling into any of their traps. These are weak people who they're violent. They're willing to be very violent, but they don't really have a plan. They don't really know what they're doing. If they did, they would have figured out what to do with us a long time ago. They really, and they don't understand that if Palestine is free, and it will be soon, but if Palestine was free, the sooner it's free, the better it will be for them. And the sooner it's free, the more quickly we're all going to make a lot of money. Listen, God chose Palestine, okay? He didn't choose the people, by the way. He chose the land. And because of that, like, we're out here in the Gulf. The natural resources out here are oil. But one day the oil might run out. I don't know. But in Palestine, our natural resource is God. And that's a fully renewable resource. And it attracts a lot of people.
To eternity.
I mean,
perpetuity.
And it promises you eternity.
Yeah.
And we are going to make, and something I learned, economic principle I learned a long time ago, is that heaven, which everybody wants, is not free. I learned that from a lot of people. And if you're poor, it's free. But if you can afford it, it's not free. And so, in America, you lived in America. In America, if you want to buy like the regular chicken from the grocery store, it's a certain price. If you want to buy the halal chicken, it's a little more.
Yeah.
Now, they're both a dead chicken, as far as I know. But with one of them, you get chicken, and one of them, you get chicken in heaven. And heaven is not free. And so Palestine, we sell heaven, man. Can you imagine one day when it's free and everybody can come and you can this is where the angel Gabriel told Mary she's going to have Jesus. Yeah. Okay, $100. You want to see it? It's $100. The Dome of the Rock, they tell you the rock is floating off you want to see it? That's $1,000. That's a good one. $1,000. Okay. And so we're going to make it's going to be by the way, Palestine is already economically pretty good. Like we Palestinians have figured out how to be successful under occupation. It's going to be so much better. This is what I tell Palestinians, you haven't been to Ramallah. Hopefully one day you'll go, and you should go as soon as you can. And everyone should go as soon as they can. But I always tell the Palestinians in Ramallah when I see them, I say, you guys make it really difficult for me. They say, why? I say, look, I consider myself like a Palestinian spokesperson for our cause, among many others. And but I can't bring anyone to Ramallah, because if I bring a friend of mine to Ramallah, I'm going to show him where the 5-star hotel is, and there is. Then I'm going to show him where we can go to an amazing restaurant, eat $100 filet mignon, and that exists. And then I'm going to drive him by the Range Rover dealership. And then I have to explain to him there's occupation. And you guys have you guys have been so successful. You figured out how to be successful. We're so resourceful. You figured out how to be successful, and it's like, but then I try to explain to people. I say, look, the Palestinian situation has never been, and this is why we were so affected.
If I may interrupt, when you talk about them managing to be successful in all circumstances. Prior to October 7th, just a few months earlier, we hired tech interns in Gaza.
Yeah.
Almost as a community service.
Yeah.
And not sure if we'd get any productivity out of them, but we figured we'd try it. We've had people working throughout the last 2 years in the midst of a genocide, producing the best AI and tech work in the whole company amongst hundreds of developers that we have that are spread all around the world. And we literally see these people sitting outside of rubble in a different place almost every day because, their prior place got bombed out and they had to move. And they're still working through the day and the night, producing crazy code. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think about, I got, my toe scratched, and I think about, do I go to work tomorrow?
Right. Yeah.
And their ability to be resilient and to find ways to succeed in the most impossible circumstances is unfathomable. Every day
Well, during COVID, I used to do lives during COVID on Instagram, and I would talk to people from Gaza. And, Gaza Sky Geeks and all these are the people you're talking about. Being Palestinian has always been defined by excellence, okay? We have a long tradition of overachieving. My dad has 41 patents. He grew up in UNRWA as an UNRWA refugee. He went to those blue schools, the terrorist schools. He went to one of those. I'm sure the same is, and it's not a unique story.
My dad's an UNRWA refugee too.
Right.
I went to the UNRWA schools and has had an amazing career.
It's not a unique story. Yeah. We come from a long line of overachievers, whether it's my dad or your dad or Edward Said or Hanan Ashrawi or Mahmoud Darwish or Jesus. Major overachiever, okay? Mary, big time overachiever. We come from this line. And so this is, by the way, why, and so the Palestinian situation has never been defined by poverty or hunger. It's never been a charity thing. It's been a matter of political invisibility and political immobility. And so, we're here in Dubai where there's 500,000 Palestinians, and they're doing very well for themselves, but most of them are stateless. They literally don't have a passport to anywhere, and they shop for passports around the world. That's our story, right? This is why we were so affected when we saw our brothers and sisters in Gaza begging for food, because that's not something we're used to. Even understanding all of our problems, it's never been that.
Yeah.
And the Israelis knew that. And when they did that to us, that was a lot of psychological warfare. That's why we were so taken by that. So I try to explain to people, as a tech guy, you get this. I always take out my phone and I say to people, look, if I take out my phone and I look at a city next to Gaza called Sderot, which is a settlement outside of Gaza with about 30,000 people. And if you zoom in on it on Google Maps, you'll see what you would expect to see: bus stops, names of every store, name of every street. But if you then just move over like a few miles into Gaza and zoom in, there's no street names and there's no locations. There's a few.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah, there's a few like user-defined things, but that's it. And I know that these streets have names, and I know that there's stores here because there's 2 million people who live here. Okay, that's the occupation. The occupation is that
erasure. It's erasure of even the existence of the human beings.
Yeah, it is that the people in the settlements outside of Gaza have 5G, and the people in Gaza have 2G. Because Israel decides how many Gs you get. In Ramallah, they have 3G. That's the occupation.
One of the scariest stories I heard, and I think when you talk about 5G and 2G and what they decide, was how for the longest time dates with seeds wouldn't be allowed in, because with a seed you could plant a new date tree. How at some point a Japanese mission in Gaza had found out that there's a shortage of protein by design, and that mushrooms could be a great way of ensuring that there's more protein, and you could grow it pretty much anywhere. You could grow it in a basement. The mushrooms weren't allowed in because that would allow for a certain amount of self-sufficiency. So when you hear about these stories of absolute control of every aspect of one's life to make sure that you're on basic sustenance level in spite of all of your genius and your capability. And it's a designed human tragedy that's been going on for decades. And
look, I made a video about 5 years ago where I showed that you could ask Siri, what time is it anywhere in the world? And she would tell you. And the minute you asked her what time it is in Palestine, she said, I don't know what time it is there. That's what it is. Despite all of that, despite everything that they've done to us, there is still a Range Rover dealership in Ramallah.
and a filet mignon restaurant.
And there's people buying it.
Yeah.
So the level of innovation. This is why, listen, I get the Israelis, man. I get them in this sense, like, don't give Palestinians a chance. Because if you give us a chance, we will. But if you understand that we can maybe be like a way to, I don't want to say partners, because they have a lot to do before they can be our partners. But if you make a Palestinian able to fully show their talent, and we're gonna excel, man. This is not theoretical. It's happened everywhere that we've been. True. Okay, even in China. Do you know that? So El Khalil is our biggest commercial center in Palestine. It's the biggest city in Palestine. Hebron, they call it in English. 250,000 people, and they created a relationship with China about 20, 30 years ago. And these are businessmen. And so they go to Amman and they fly to China, and they have a lot of businesses, okay? And they get stuff into Khalil from China. And they've made such a presence for themselves in China that they're well known. And sometimes these Khalili guys, they go to China, they live there for a couple of years, they might marry a Chinese woman, have little Chinese Khalili kids walking around, But I was in an airport in Detroit a few years ago, and there was a Chinese guy there. And I was wearing a Palestine t-shirt. I wear Palestine stuff. I was wearing a Palestine t-shirt. And he looked at my t-shirt and he goes, where are you from? I said, Palestine. He said, is that in Hebron?
I love that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you understand?
Yeah.
This means the Khalili are going to China. They're so successful. And when someone asks them where they're from, they say El Khalil.
Yeah.
And then they say China or say Palestine later, maybe. Okay. But they're so well known. They've achieved so much that even their village their city is well known there, to a point where it's become part of the Chinese lexicon.
Amazing.
Okay, and he said to me, "Is that in Hebron?" Do you know what I said to him? I said, "Yes, it is." Yes, because I knew exactly what happened, and I didn't want to mess up what the Khalili have done.
Amazing.
And I said, "Yes, it is." So these are the Palestinian tentacles go everywhere, and look, this is because of Israel. Like, we could have just been like Palestinians living in our land, but they have turned us into these wildly trilingual, overachieving, overeducated people. And they better figure out how to deal with us, because not only are we very successful and very educated outside of Palestine, turns out we really are inside of Palestine too. And between the river and the sea right now, there are 14 million people, and 7 million of them are Palestinian and 7 million of them are Jewish. And we're not going anywhere. They really thought that if they were as brutal as they were in Gaza, that the people of Gaza would eventually say, "Get us out of here." And that didn't happen. And the Israelis were shocked by this. They didn't understand why aren't these people leaving? And they were shocked that we weren't leaving, because they would have left. Okay? And they have a bigger problem, Rabea. You know what the bigger problem is? The Israelis have never truly understood us, but they've done some studies on us. And they did a study on the Palestinian community that lives inside Israel. And they discovered that the birth rate in the Palestinian community in Israel is 8 children per woman. Average. Some 5, some 11. 8 children per woman.
Yeah.
The Palestinian population after 1948 inside Israel, they exiled 850,000 people, but 150,000 people remained. If those people grew at the normal average global birth rate, after 75, 77 years, they should be about 700,000. They are 2 million, okay? 8 children per woman. You cannot recover from that. You can't recover from that. We're not going anywhere. Do you know there have been more babies born in Gaza since October 7th than we've lost?
I did not know that.
We are not going anywhere. Okay, they drop bombs, we drop babies. They cannot get rid of us. 2,000 years ago, a woman in Palestine got pregnant and nobody touched her. So what do you think would happen when we start touching each other? A lot of babies. Yeah. And so they're not getting rid of us. Let me ask you this. Your dad, how many? He's one of how many?
15.
Your mom?
6 was my mom. Yeah.
6 is low.
Yeah, 6 is low. No, she's
low.
from a small family.
So when you guys have like a congregation of first cousins.
No, it's in the dozens.
Right.
It literally is dozens.
And that was intentional.
Yeah.
You know, our families did that intentionally. My parents had 4, and everyone around them was like, "What's 4? What are you doing? You're not making us proud."
Yeah.
Okay. This is who we are, and they're never ever going to get rid of us. Hopefully, they come to that realization quicker. But the problem with Israel is different than America or South Africa. In America and South Africa, there were systems of apartheid and racism, but they were mostly for economic reasons. The racism was the vehicle to achieve the economic goals. And so when they realized that the economic goals might be jeopardized, like in America, slavery became a bad idea, a bad look. Jim Crow became a bad look. In South Africa, apartheid became a bad look. They stopped. They stopped in time so they could, but they still own everything. But they stopped in time and they said, we have democracy, and everyone won the Nobel Peace Prize and all that kind of stuff. In Israel, the racism is the thing. Like, it is the reason for the racism. They literally believe they're better, okay? And Smotrich the other day said, international law doesn't apply to us because we're Jews, because we're the chosen people. And so that means that they will never decide that enough is enough. But there's a name for that kind of person. They're called an addict. And drug addicts always overdose.
Yeah.
But they always do the craziest things right before they overdose. And that's where we are now. I've never been more hopeful about Palestine than I am right now, because we're not going anywhere, and because the world is with us, and we're living in a new time, and liberation and freedom is near. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know that in America 2 years ago, if you said the word Palestine or Gaza, no one knew what you were talking about. And now there are 22-year-old white kids with a TikTok account giving lessons on Palestinian history. It's unreal. Yeah. Now, they're not always like the fun, but they're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay? And that is irreversible. I don't care how many times they try to buy TikTok or CBS News. It's over for them. That's irreversible. And everyone needs to kind of come to that realization because, going back to what we talked about, the truth always comes out. It always comes out.
You've been through, as an Arab American, Palestinian American, I guess, two very significant historical inflection points. September 11th was one where Arab Americans' relationship to America and vice versa was very fundamentally affected. And obviously October 7th is the second one. You hinted a bit about that post-October 7th, there's a greater recognition, but maybe you can walk me through what your experience has been as an Arab American with those two inflection points and how things have changed, whether it's just in the pure recognition that you exist or, I'm sure there are positive and negative things. I'd love to hear a bit about
Look, I mean, they were both like a big shock, obviously. And September 11th, I was a graduate student in college and, my mom called me up and said, don't go outside and all this kind of stuff. People were scared. And
in Michigan, particularly, huge Arab American community.
Of course. And people were scared. Now, but we were Americans as well. So in some ways, we felt like we were victims twice, right? We were victims as Americans, and then we were victims of what we knew, what was coming, the backlash. And there was major backlash. But October 7th was way worse, because October 7th mobilized a hate campaign against us that was way bigger than what happened after 9/11. At least after 9/11, if you remember, George Bush, who I don't have many good things to say about, George Bush visited a mosque within a week after 9/11 and said, this is not a war against Muslims. Joe Biden didn't do anything like that. Joe Biden came out 3 days later and said he saw beheaded babies when he didn't. And then a 6-year-old Palestinian boy was stabbed 26 times in Chicago. That was the environment.
Brown kids walking back at night got
shot in Vermont. 3 kids from Ramallah shot in Vermont for wearing a keffiyeh. And I went and visited them, Hisham, Kenan, and Tahsin. And I know their families. And that kind of stuff was so deep. At the same time, though, there were levels of optimism, and we didn't have the same kind of social media in 2001. There were levels of optimism that arise because you started to see people learn. What happened with October 7th is that because of like the magnitude of it, it made people ask questions that they didn't normally ask. And we Palestinians have always said to people, please go do your research, go ask. It's the other side that's always said, don't ask questions. It's complicated. It's just listen to what we say. People started asking questions and they realized that we were telling the truth. And then when they realized we were telling the truth, they realized that their governments have been lying to them. And when you realize that you've been lied to for a long time, your first emotion is anger. And anger is what brought them in the streets with us, not sympathy. Anger that their governments were doing these things and lying to them, and they wanted accountability for that. And that awakened something different in America. So while the backlash was much greater after October 7th than it was after 9/11, the prospects for a future, I think, are better because the governments and media can't control information like they used to after September 11th. And there's so many people who have learned about Palestine from people who were doing it before, like me. Like a lot of my videos got lots of views after October 7th, videos that I made way before. Like I made a video in 2020 called Akhaduha Mafrushi about, they took Palestine fully furnished, about my mom was saying. And that started getting a lot more attention. So I'm very optimistic now, and I can see the difference. And maybe Israel saw it coming. Maybe that's why Israel and the American right were so much more aggressive after October 7th than they were after 9/11. Very aggressive, right? Dehumanizing us in ways that didn't happen after 9/11. Talking about us as animals.
You're in Dubai for a comedy show.
Yeah.
And you've publicly announced you're going to donate the proceeds, I believe, to UNRWA.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about that.
Well, every Palestinian, whether they're an artist or not, have struggled with, what to do and how to conduct themselves since October 7th and how to make a difference. And we've all been really sort of frustrated by these things. And so I've done probably, upwards of $100,000 worth of like donated performances and
Amazing
stuff since October 7th. And because, look, luckily I've done okay for myself in my career. October 7th should never have been seen by any artist, and sadly it was by some as a way to make more money, as a way to cash in. I don't like seeing artists and comedians say, "Hey, I said something great about October 7th. Here's the ticket link." I hate that. And a lot of people have done that and capitalized on it. And then we've seen very clearly that it's been a vehicle to just do other stuff. It's never really been about Palestine for them. For me, look, my dad's an UNRWA kid, and he has 41 patents because of UNRWA. And so doing this is natural for me. And I've asked people to come out and support. And, that experience, to me, that's much more important than, I could put, tens of thousands of dollars in my pocket. But we have to all find ways. And I've been so impressed and so inspired by my people over the last 2 years who have found so many different ways to be involved and to give back. And it just shows how beautiful we are as a people. And it shows that we possess the truth, because if we didn't feel like we were actually holders of the truth, we wouldn't be doing this kind of stuff. Really, we wouldn't. But we were taught that by Jesus. I mean, Jesus, no matter whether you're religious or not, I'm not particularly religious, but he was a pretty influential guy, pretty famous. And he said, the truth shall set you free. And I still believe that. And so to me, that's what this is all about, giving back as much as we can, because we owe it to Palestine has given so much to us. Palestine has taught us how to be strong, how to tell the truth, how to stand up for what's right. And we've been doing that when it comes to things that aren't Palestine too, whether it's Black Lives Matter or other things throughout the world. And so to me, it's natural. To me, it's not natural to say, hey, please help me put money in my pocket because I talked about Palestine. I mean, maybe that'll come one day. And luckily, we're all doing okay. But it's really because of my parents and what they taught me and what I think every Palestinian parent tried to teach their kids. But my dad was this UNRWA kid. And while I'm very impressed by him, it's been very hard to live with him. Well, he was ethnically cleansed when he was 1 month old. He grew up in a refugee neighborhood. Then he finished first in high school and went to college. Then he finished first in college and went to get his master's degree. Then he finished first in his master's degree and got a PhD from one of the most elite institutions ever. Then he worked for this big chemical company for a long time, and he has 41 patents, and he has nice cars and big house and put all his kids through college. Amazing. It's an amazing story. This is who we are. Yeah, but can you imagine being the son of this person?
a bit of a high bar.
I mean, I can never impress him. I've told this story 100. I see. I remember I was a kid. I brought home my test from school. I said, "Baba, here's my test. I got a 96. Where is the other 4?" This is who we deal with. But it's a beautiful thing. And the thing I love the most about my story and my parents' story is that it's not unique. It's not unique. It is who we are. And they better figure out how to live with us, because the more and more they make us fight against the odds, we're going to be overachievers. If you want Palestinians to be average, give us a state and let us deal with everyday problems. But the more and more you force us to be overachievers, we're going to prove you wrong. And I always say they don't understand us. I was in Palestine 10 years ago, and I was talking to a guy, and I said to him, tell me about yourself. He said, Amer, I have a PhD in computer science from England. I said, wow. I wasn't shocked. This is normal. I said, what do you do? He said, عندنا محل أواعي في البلد. Okay, we have a clothing store. I said, man, you have a PhD in computer science. You could live anywhere in the world. You can make a lot of money. You could send it here. He said, Amer, I will stay in Palestine and fight until I am free. I said, okay, first of all, calm down. Okay. I'm on your side. Okay. I'm not your enemy. I said, what will you do when you're free? He said, when I am free, I will leave. Okay? So it's very simple. You want us to leave, give us freedom, and maybe we'll leave. But as long as we think that we might not be able to go back, we're not going anywhere. And so that is the story of Palestine. And I love being us. You know, I never say I'm proud to be Palestinian, but that's not really the right word. You know, I didn't achieve this. It just happened to me. But I cannot think of any better fate than being a Palestinian.
Amer, thank you for all that you do, for speaking truth, for speaking out for Palestine, for giving so much of what you bring into Palestine, for sharing a wonderful book that I'm excited about reading. And,
thank you, Rabea. And look, I'm going to say to you what I say to every Palestinian and that we should always say to each other. It's 3 things. I'm happy to see you, I'm proud of you, and I love you.
Proud of you and love you too. Thank you so much, Amer.
Thanks. Good to see you.